Come to sermon time this morning in one word: obstacles. That's a word that's familiar to most people. Generally not a good thing, right? If you have an obstacle, you know you have something that's in your way, something that hinders you. Basically, talking about obstacles, we're talking about things in general that impede your progress. So obviously we need a little more information. We need more words because there's obstacles in everything. Anything that is worthwhile that you endeavor to do, most likely you're going to encounter obstacles. Everything. So we have to narrow this down, and I'm sure you already suspect exactly what way and where we're going, to be specific. Obstacles on the way to heaven. We want to go to heaven. We want to be on the way to heaven. But do we think often enough and hard enough about the obstacles? A lot of folks in the religious world today think, well, the way to heaven is easy going. The way to heaven is smooth sailing. It's to heaven. We all know that if we're on the way to heaven, inherent in that way are obstacles. Can't avoid them. They're there. So simply to say, it's time for us at the end of the year, 2023, to think a little bit about obstacles so we can perhaps think positively into the new year, making some good resolutions about them. On the road to heaven, there are obstacles. And I suggest to you that they present to us a challenge. And that challenge I would express as challenging us to successfully manage them. You have to manage your obstacles, whatever it is, whether it's in your way to getting a better job, to getting an education, to improving your health. You have to manage the obstacles. Well, how important is that as we go to heaven? We must manage those obstacles. That means that we want to, go to heaven in spite of them. They're not going to keep us out of heaven. They shouldn't. Everybody has obstacles. And what it is our objective to do is to make sure they don't keep us out of heaven. So we're going to heaven in spite of these obstacles. But I also want to express at the beginning of our thoughts together this morning that we need to have the confidence, I can do this. Because sometimes those obstacles are kind of minuscule. Other times they're mammoth. And so easy, extremely difficult. But you and I need to have the confidence that we can do this. That means every day, if there's an obstacle on the way to heaven on that day, we will manage it, we can do it, and we will be successful. So this leaves us with a question. What are these obstacles? Well, I think it's very worth our while to take some time to identify them, and for the primary purpose of raising our awareness, alertness, to give us help and encouragement and inspiration to deal with them. So I want to take opportunity this morning to identify some of these obstacles. Obviously, I won't identify everyone in your life because you have some that are uniquely yours and I uniquely mine. But some of these that we're going to talk about in the next few minutes are common to all of us. Something we all share together in dealing with these obstacles. So we're going to have a sign pop up that alerts us to an obstacle ahead. What I'm going to have on the left side of the chart is basically a photograph of an obstacle in the road, an actual highway, where these obstacles are in the road and impeding progress and travel. Now, obviously, we intend for those only to be symbolic of the obstacles on the way to heaven. Because the road to heaven is not a physical highway here on the earth. It is a spiritual way that we will identify later. But these photographs of these obstacles symbolize. And I've been kind of selective in picking them out, these photographs, so that they actually in some way are analogous to the spiritual obstacles. There's a rock in the road. Going down this highway, we have an obstacle. Doesn't look too bad, but it's in the way. It's going to impede our progress. It's going to slow us down. But this particular obstacle is going to represent temptation. We're suggesting today that one of the obstacles on your way to heaven is temptation. You're traveling along, going very well, and all of a sudden, Satan comes along with a solicitation for you to do something he wants you to do to violate God's law. Okay? So now your progress is being slowed. Your progress is being impeded to some degree. We have a passage in 1 John chapter 2, verse 16, where John refers to how this is done. He doesn't use the word temptation, but what we have in this one verse is every single way that Satan tempts you. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. We've talked often about the sense in which the word world occurs in the New Testament, or 4 or 5. Here it obviously is referring to the realm over which Satan rules. The world out there that is Satan's world, that is tempting us, and Satan tempts you through your flesh. That is your carnal nature, things that you would desire that way. Through your eyes, what can be stimulated by sight, but also desire that can be stimulated by your pride. Some translations say the vainglory of life. Those are the 3 avenues into you that Satan uses. One way or another, one at a time, all at a time. So we have to be aware that when this happens, it's going to come in this way. James records the answer to all of this in brief. James chapter 4, verses 7 and the beginning of verse 8. Submit therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. That is such an important instruction in the New Testament for all of us, of how we are able to avoid committing sin. We resist the temptation. We say no. We do not yield. We resist. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to say this. I'm not going to feel this. In any way sin can come into our being, we refuse. And so we manage the obstacle. We travel on down the road a ways, and lo and behold, sign comes up again. Obstacle ahead. This time it is a different obstacle. It looks a little different. When you see it, it's rather, whoa. That brings us to a stop. This happens sometimes, if this has ever occurred to you. But it represents an obstacle on your way to heaven. And what it represents is sin. Come up against it, can't go anywhere, at least as far as God is concerned. We can't progress toward heaven as far as God is concerned, because sin results from our yielding to that temptation, giving in to that temptation, actually allowing Satan to have his way with us, and us giving in and say, okay, this time. Well, that means we have violated God. There's a number of ways that sin is defined in the New Testament. There are several definitions, but basically all of them result in this: we are violating God. And you cannot violate God, the God of heaven, and be progressing toward heaven. So it's an obstacle. In Isaiah chapter 59 and verse 2, the passage is written to express the effect that sin has in one's relationship to God. Your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God, and your sins have hid his face from you, so that he does not hear. Now, that's some pretty sobering statements, thoughts, realizations about what sin does to our relationship to God. It separates us from him. He turns his face away from us. He doesn't have a literal face like we do, but that means he is turned away from us, and he will not hear us as long as sin stands between us and him. That's the condition. It does not take care of itself automatically. You and I must see that our sin, this obstacle, is removed as a Christian by seeking God's forgiveness through the blood of Christ. And when we seek forgiveness and ask with our confession, then that sin is forgiven. That obstacle is out of the way. We just keep right on going. We'll talk in just a moment at the end of the lesson about if we're not yet a Christian. It has a similar application. In Revelation chapter 21 and verse 27, toward the end of the book, you remember that there's a beautiful description of heaven, of how it is described in such beautiful terms. But here in 21:27, Jesus reveals to the Apostle John who exactly is not going to enter and who will. And that's vital information for us. He said, and nothing unclean, and no one who practices abomination and lying shall ever come into it, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life. Now that says a lot. That doesn't say everything that the New Testament says, but it tells us, number one, that sin will never enter heaven. So if you're carrying one, that is to mean guilt, if you're still guilty of sin, then that needs to be taken care of. That needs to be forgiven so that that sin and that guilt and its resultant punishment is removed from you. Because it is made very clear to us in the New Testament, in this and in other passages, that any sin or anything, the way Revelation puts it, unclean, will ever come into it. And make sure your name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life. That is, you're a faithful child of God. Oh, would you want to travel on down the road a ways? We have another sign come up warning us of another obstacle. No, that's an obstacle. That's a mammoth. There's a lot to think about just on the physical aspect of that, but we're not dealing with the physical aspects of that today. I just want it to be symbolic of something big. So what in your life, on your way to heaven, you think that could represent in proportionate size? The problems of self. I just heard the expression yesterday. I won't give all the context. He is his own worst enemy. And I already had that statement in mind because it occurs quite often that sometimes we're told you are being your own enemy by your behavior, the way that you're acting, what you're doing. You are an enemy, an adversary to yourself, and we can be our own worst enemy. And so it is on the way to heaven. There are a lot of things that become obstacles, but we can be our own worst enemy. Under the category and heading of what psychologically we could call problems of self. We could be selfish. We could be self-indulgent, indulge ourselves. The only thing we think about is just satisfying me. I just want to satisfy me. I don't care about you. I just indulge myself. Self-centered. Very closely related, but a self-centered person has the ego and everything revolving around it. The whole world revolves around self. The world is here for me. You're here for me. The center of my universe is me. That's the way that self-centeredness is expressed. Another is self-willed. Hey, it's going to be my way. My way or the highway. I don't care what you think. I don't care what you feel. A problem of self is self-willed. It's interesting how this is taught in the New Testament. It's even one of the qualifications that is specifically set forth to be an elder in the Lord's church. None of us, no Christian, is allowed to be self-willed. That is a problem of self. Self-righteous, hey, I'm right regardless of what I do. I don't care what you think, I'm right. And what I do earns me the merit of being better and in need of nothing. Oh, you think of this self-righteousness, this is exactly the way the Jews were in the ministry of Christ. Rick is talking about this morning in class in these parables. Self-righteousness. We don't need anyone or anything. I'm good enough. I'm righteous within myself. But there's also some other things that would come under the category of problems of self. It's not just these self-hyphenated problems, but you can dislike others so much. Develop a dislike for somebody. Just why don't you like? I just don't like them, you know. And that attitude is a bad attitude because it can keep people from coming to church. It can keep people from speaking, from doing deeds of kindness. But then there's the attitude of having a grudge. You did something to me, and I'm going to get you back. I'm going to have vengeance here. I'm going to have payback because I'm going to do to you what you did to me, except I'm going to do it worse. And you're going to hurt because of what you did to me. That's a faulty, sinful attitude. It's a problem of self. Clinging to the past. Adam had an excellent short talk Wednesday night from Philippians chapter 3, giving us the example of Paul, how Paul pressed on. And what he said in doing that, he would forget the things that are behind. Well, I had this graphic. I want you to look at this graphic and how it makes clear the problem of having a ball and chain in the past. If you're chained to the past and it so dominates your thinking and controls as an obsession, you see, when this guy's foot, about the time it hits that rock, you see what that chain's going to do? It kind of speaks what the past can do. It's going to yank him back. He's not going to be progressing as he ought to. So that ball and chain of the past is a faulty way of thinking. Then there is discouragement. That's pretty common. I mean, more of us probably experience this. And it can be very natural. It results from disappointment. It can be very minor, or it can be very major. And when it gets to the major depth, it gets pretty serious. It gets into clinical depression. And those are kind of things that are very serious. So this faulty attitude needs to be dealt with at whatever level it may occur in us, so that we don't allow disappointment or whatever it is that causes us to lose our morale to become a problem, an obstacle. Then there is the doubt. I'm just not sure anymore, you know. There's so many things going on in the world and so many things that indicate that more and more people are standing against God, standing against the Bible, and so there are any number of things and powerful in the world that Satan uses to cause us to question, to doubt the Bible, to doubt God. And we have, as a result of that, hesitation. And when we hesitate, we're not progressing. We're not advancing. We're not moving toward heaven. There are a couple of passages in the New Testament, just two scriptures. If we just read once in a while, they will help us tremendously. The Lord helps us overcome the problems of self when he gave this requirement for discipleship. Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." One of the things that Jesus requires of every single individual, without exception, who will become a disciple of his, he must deny self. Now that needs to be thought about, because that's just not saying no once in a while or some minor thing that happens. But word study on this indicates that the language has the impact. This denial is a concept of obliteration, like putting a stick of dynamite to it and blowing it out of the water, so that it's no longer a factor. It's no longer on the throne in our heart. And so, deny self. If we deny ourselves like Jesus taught, we'll not be selfish. We'll not be self-indulgent or have any of those problems. But then the Apostle Peter addressed this in 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 and 6. "Now for this very reason also, applying all diligence, in your faith supply moral excellence." In some translations that would be virtue. Maybe you memorized the verse that way. "And in your moral excellence, knowledge. And in your knowledge, self-control." So one of the qualities that we are expected to add to our Christian character has to do with solving the problems of self. Because this is simply teaching us that in order to travel on the way to heaven, in addition to all of these other qualities, we need some ability. We need to have strength to control ourselves. And what we're seeing in the world today is more and more out of control people, people who don't want to control themselves, people who don't care enough to even try to control themselves. And we can all see what happens to a civilized society when people do not control. But we're not talking about that broad of extent. Let's bring it home. Let's bring it to our relationships, to our work, to our school, to our church, work and home, all of those. Self-control. Well, we travel on down the road and there's another sign. We have another obstacle coming up. That one's not so bad. It's kind of messy, and we've seen something like that. We had a lot like that around here during the ice storm, you may remember. But there's an obstacle in the way, and it's messy. Well, this particular graphic is going to represent false doctrine. It's messy. What I'm talking about is teaching that is not in the Bible. And when we just say that, we're already in conflict with most of the people in the religious world. Because most people that we talk to about religion, who are a part of the general religious world, do not even think there is such a thing as false doctrine. All doctrine's okay. It's just different. Well, it's different, all right. But is there false doctrine or not? Well, in 2 John verse 9, John put it this way: anyone who goes too far and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. The one who abides in the teaching, he has both the Father and the Son. Now that's pretty direct. That's pretty clear. Is there such a thing as teaching that is regarded as false? As John says, if anybody that continues and does not follow the teaching of Christ, he's gone too far. But the real sobering consequence, he doesn't have God. Now, you can talk to him all day. He thinks he does, perhaps. Oh, well, I believed this all of my life. My family has believed this for generations. But it's not taught in the Bible. It's not found in the teaching of Christ in the New Testament, the law of Christ for us today. Where does that leave us? Well, let's just accept what it says. What the Bible says, anyone who goes this far does not have God. What do we need to do to have God? Follow the teaching. That is the truth. And that's referring, of course, to the teaching of Christ. David said in Psalm 119, 104, this is where we need to stand. He said, from thy precepts I get understanding. Therefore, I hate every false way. Sometimes the word hate becomes a word of non-use to us. It is true. There are sinful ways to hate. Malice, ill will, those are sinful hates. There are other ways that God hates. And God teaches you and me to hate. That means feeling an aversion towards something, just repugnance. Can't stand it because it is so wrong. That's a kind of hate that God has also. But my point here is, what is it that we're taught to feel that way about? Every false way. Don't ever feel like, hey, I'm just going to be neutral on this. I'm just going to ride the fence on this. There's no place in neutrality, and there's no place on the fence for anyone who's on the way to heaven. You have got to develop such a feeling of aversion towards, such a feeling of repugnance for false doctrine that you can't stand it. And you will speak out against it. You will defend the truth and never hesitate to identify false doctrine. Because God is on your side, Christ is on your side, the Holy Spirit is on your side, and we as a church take a stand for that. Galatians chapter 1, verse 9, the apostle addressing the New Testament churches among those in Galatia. As we have said before, so say I now again, if any man is preaching to you, now notice, a gospel contrary to that which he received, let him be anathema. Paul knew that was happening. He wasn't there, but he knew that was happening. He had been there. He preached the truth. He preached the gospel of Christ. They had the gospel of Christ. Others came in preaching something different. And what Paul said about that, Paul could have said, okay, that's okay. That way they have a choice. But Paul said nothing like that. Let's don't even go down that road, because that's not right. What Paul said, if any man preaches to you a gospel contrary to that which you heard and believed, let him be accursed, let him be anathema, let him be condemned to eternal hell. Now, I don't know about you, but that's sobering. False doctrine. We come upon it possibly every day. You can be listening, you can be reading, you can be talking, and people express some kind of teaching. Well, you may not know at first, is that the truth or not? Well, that's why we need to know the truth. We need to know the scriptures so we can identify the truth and identify what's true and what's not true so that we can identify false doctrine, and that is an obstacle. I've got to manage that and still make my progress toward heaven. We've got more road to cover. Going down the road, and it just keeps popping up. Let me, there we go. That doesn't look so bad, does it, compared to some that we've had. We have that situation occur quite often in our woods. Our vehicle can't get under that. It's an obstacle. It has to be managed. It's just inconvenient. It's just painful to have to take time to clear things out of the way to get on up that hill. To me, that represents adversity. What can be painful? What can be inconvenient? Instances of difficulty. Oh, it's an obstacle. And it becomes an obstacle in several different ways. And I'm going to name some of them. Opposition, symbolic of opposition, people opposing you, opposing what you believe, opposing what you stand for. And a lot of times we're very conscious of that and very sensitive about that. And sometimes we shy away when we shouldn't. It can come from personal problems. We all have problems, sometime or another, to some degree. There are always personal problems. We live in this physical world, and in all of its complexities, and we have problems on a personal level. We have problems in the home. We have problems at work. We have problems at school. There are problems, and those problems are obstacles that have to be managed. Hurting when you hurt. It has a tendency to change us a little bit. change our thinking, change our way of feeling and reacting. Sometimes people do things deliberately just to make us hurt, to persecute. I have that worded carefully because I'm not making any political statements, although maybe we would like to sometime. This is not that. This could say dysfunctional government, but right now what's causing so much adverse in our living conditions in our environment is malfunction, functioning the wrong way, not functioning according to the will of the people in ways that are wrong. Malfunction. That creates, and depending on how much that affects you, does become an obstacle. Because it's the world in which we live. It's the citizenship here on the earth, which is not our primary citizenship, but the living conditions, security, danger, home invasion, a lot of different things occur in this world today that have affected our living conditions. And we don't need to go into all of those to remind us. But the international unrest is certainly, as we look at the world in which we live, the relationship between nations is certainly in a state of unrest. And that itself causes us to have concern for our country, concern for our homes, the future of security of our homes, of our families, of our kids, of our grandkids. All of those come under the category of adversity. Paul said in Romans chapter 5, verses 3 and 4, not only this, but we also exalt in our tribulation, knowing that tribulation, and this is his point, brings about perseverance, that's patience. And perseverance, proven character. And proven character, hope. We've studied recently in our Wednesday night class of Building Hope, and this is one of the passages that speaks directly about how hope is brought about. And you see, by tribulation, by adversity, because adversity is going to bring about more patience. You're going to be more patient if you get through it okay. And then more patience is going to improve your character. And you're improving character. Hey, I desire and I expect to go to heaven. That's one passage that we need to read often about that. This leads us to be able to ask a question, answer as we wind down here. A question that we often have to answer. Do all roads lead to heaven? Because we hear more often than not, yes, they do. You see, in this graphic, we only have two. And the signs indicate you can go this way, you can go this way, and end up in heaven. It doesn't matter which way you go. But in reality, in the religious world, there are thousands of ways, according to doctrine and faith. So just to make this brief and concise to the point, do all roads lead to heaven? Absolutely not. That is a false concept. A concept that misleads a lot of people, because Jesus said that he is the way, the truth, and the life. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 13 and 14, he said there are only two ways altogether. One of them is the narrow way. The other is the broad way. There are only two, period. The narrow way is the one, he says, enter ye in by the narrow gate, so you can be on the narrow way, because that's the one that leads to life. That's the one that ends up in heaven. The other way, the only other one, is the broad way. And it ends up in eternal destruction. So when an individual finds themselves not yet a Christian, not yet on the way to heaven, you're not on your way yet if you're not a Christian. Then I want us to consider what Paul said in Galatians 3:26 and 27 to get on that right way. For you're all sons of God through Christ, through faith in Christ Jesus. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. Now that is in one passage. There are many. And in this one, it shows what we need to do to be on that one way where Jesus said, I am that way. It's not named after a church. It is Christ. He is the way. So we got to make sure that we are in him. And so in this passage, all of you who were baptized into him, we want to be clothed with him. And in order to be clothed with him, you have to be baptized into him. Our challenge, get on the way. Get on the road. That is the way to heaven. That's a first challenge for someone that's not there yet. Successfully manage the obstacles. Go to heaven in spite of the obstacles. And finally, for all of us, have confidence that, yes, I can do this. We have to have that confidence in Christ because I can do all things in him that strengtheneth me. If there's anyone subject to the invitation of Christ in this audience this morning, or anyone in the live streaming audience that would like to study further, we encourage you to let us know while together we stand and sing.